When I married Daniel, I didn't just say I do to a man. I unknowingly pledged loyalty to a shadow that would live in our house. Her name was Margaret, and from the very first moment we met, she looked at me as if I were something stuck to the bottom of her shoe. She didn't have to raise her voice or slam doors to make me feel small. Margaret was skilled in the fine art of subtle cruelty. It was in the way she adjusted her pearls while glancing at my off-brand shoes. It was the sigh she let out when I mentioned my parents owned a grocery store in Newark, and it was definitely in the way she always reminded me, with a soft chuckle, that some people just weren't raised around real class. At first, I tried to win her over. I hosted dinners, remembered her favorite wine, even learned how to fold linen napkins into swans. She smiled politely, then told me I had overcooked the steak. That was Margaret's way, killing with compliments, reviving with insults. When she temporarily moved in after her knee surgery, I gave her the master bedroom. She said it was too soft. I bought her new pillows, too firm. She called Daniel my sweet boy and called me the help when she thought I couldn't hear. I endured it all, not for her, but for him. Daniel wasn't cruel, but he was blind. He thought keeping peace meant staying silent, and every time I came to him with something Margaret had said, he'd say, "That's just how she is, babe. Don't let it get to you." But one evening, it finally did. It was Daniel's birthday. I'd spent the whole day preparing a meal from scratch: herb-roasted chicken, homemade rolls, hand-whipped mashed potatoes. I even bought candles and folded the napkins into perfect little hearts. I wasn't trying to impress her anymore. I just wanted him to feel loved. As I was setting the last plate on the table, Margaret walked into the dining room. She glanced at the setup with a smirk. "Well," she said, adjusting her diamond bracelet, "you're just the maid, but at least you've made yourself useful." I stood there, napkin still in hand. For a second, I thought I hadn't heard her right. But then I saw the satisfaction in her eyes. That subtle lift of her chin, the way she always smiled when she believed she'd won. I didn't speak. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I walked to the kitchen drawer, pulled out a small silver keychain, and walked back to her. "What's this?" she asked, clearly annoyed by the interruption. "The house keys," I said calmly. "You've always acted like this was your house. Now it is." I placed them in her hand and turned away. As I grabbed my coat, I heard her scoff. "You're being dramatic." I paused at the door, looked back at her, and smiled, really smiled. "No, Margaret, I've just stopped pretending." Then I left. I didn't know exactly where I was going, but for the first time in years, I felt the weight of pretending slip off my shoulders like an old, dirty coat. And I knew this was the beginning of something I should have done a long time ago. The motel room I checked into that night smelled like bleach and old air conditioning, but for the first time in a long time, I could breathe. No perfect table settings, no passive-aggressive comments over breakfast, just silence, and a cheap floral bedspread that felt more honest than anything Margaret had ever said to me. I sat on the edge of the bed, phone in hand, staring at the missed calls from Daniel. 5, 10, then 14. I didn't answer a single one. I couldn't, not yet, because if I heard his voice, I might forget what his silence had cost me. For years, I'd put my identity in a drawer to be someone else's version of a good wife. Quiet, accommodating, invisible. I played the role so well that even I forgot who I used to be. But the truth is, before Daniel, I was more than just a woman with good manners and a polite smile. I had a degree in architecture. I had designed community housing projects in low-income neighborhoods. I'd even been offered a position at a boutique design firm in Manhattan right before Daniel proposed. But he didn't want to live in the city. "Too crowded," he said. "Let's build something simpler, together." I said yes. I turned down the job. I packed my life into boxes and followed love to the suburbs. And I don't regret choosing love, but I regret choosing silence. I thought about that as I opened my laptop and pulled up an old email, one I hadn't looked at in over a year. It was from the same firm in Manhattan. "If you ever reconsider, the door is open." I hadn't replied back then, because I thought building a life with Daniel meant giving up that part of myself. But now it felt like a life raft. I clicked reply and began typing. The next morning, I drove to a small coffee shop downtown. It was quiet, with tall windows and soft jazz playing in the background. I sat with my latte and watched people walk by. Women in suits, students, parents with toddlers. They all had somewhere to go. I envied that sense of direction. Then my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text. From Daniel. "Where are you? Mom's freaking out. Can we talk?" I stared at the screen. Mom's freaking out. Not "I'm worried about you." Not "Are you okay?" His first concern was still her. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened another app and scrolled through the documents I had saved. Deeds, contracts, plans. Because there was something Margaret, and even Daniel, didn't know. When we bought that house, Daniel's name had gone on the mortgage. But the land? The land had been mine. A quiet investment I made with inheritance money from my grandmother. Daniel never asked about the paperwork. Margaret never cared to. They just assumed the house was his, that everything was his. But the title was in my name, and not just that house. I had 3 properties, one rented, one under renovation, and one, ours, that I had gifted to our marriage out of love, not weakness. They thought I was just the maid. They had no idea I was the one who held the foundation they stood on. 2 days passed before I returned. I didn't tell anyone I was coming. I just drove straight to the house, my house, and parked in the driveway with calm, deliberate hands. The lawn looked just like I left it, perfectly trimmed. The porch light was still flickering, but inside, everything had shifted. I walked in through the front door. No knocking, no asking permission. Margaret was in the living room, reclined in Daniel's favorite chair like a queen in exile. She turned when she heard the door and sat up, startled. "You have some nerve," she said sharply. I dropped my keys onto the hallway table. "I live here." "Not anymore," she snapped, rising to her feet. "After the stunt you pulled—" "I didn't pull a stunt. I walked away from a situation that was slowly killing me." She laughed, cold and joyless. "Daniel doesn't want this drama. You embarrassed us." "No," I said, walking past her. "You embarrassed yourself. I just finally stopped helping you cover it up." I heard Daniel's footsteps coming down the stairs. His face was pale, his hair messy from lack of sleep. He looked like a man who had been scrambling to hold everything together while everything slipped away. "Hey," he said quietly. "Can we talk?" "In a minute," I said, not looking at him. I had one more thing to do first. I opened the drawer in the kitchen where we kept important documents. Everything was there. House title, insurance papers, property deeds. I pulled them out, dropped them on the dining table, and looked up. Margaret stepped into the room, her arms crossed. Daniel followed, eyes darting between us. "What are you doing?" he asked. I pointed to the documents. "You ever read these?" "I'm guessing not." He stepped closer, confused, flipping through them slowly. "This can't be right," he muttered. "It is," I said. "The house is in my name. The land, too. I paid the down payment. I maintained the taxes. I even paid the renovation bills you never looked at." Margaret's mouth fell open. "But, you said we bought it together?" Daniel stammered. "I said we were building something together. I never said you owned it." There was a long, heavy silence, the kind that breaks a home apart 1 second at a time. Then Margaret hissed, "You tricked us." I turned to her fully now. "No, Margaret. You just never asked the right questions. You were too busy treating me like the maid to realize I was the architect of this life." Daniel sat down, stunned. He looked like he was watching the floor disappear beneath his feet. "So what now?" he asked, his voice hollow. I picked up the property documents and placed them back in my bag. Then I pulled out another set, photocopies of a rental agreement and a letter of transfer. "I'm moving into one of the rental homes. I'll be filing for separation next week." "What?" He stood up. "You can't just walk away." "I already did, 2 nights ago." Margaret's face twisted in disbelief. "This is absurd. You think you can just take everything?" "No," I said, steady. "I'm just taking what's already mine." Then I looked at Daniel, softening just slightly. "You let her tear me down piece by piece and you said nothing. That silence? That's why we're here." And with that, I turned, walked out the door, and left them standing in the house that I had built, one insult at a time. The rental house wasn't glamorous. It had creaky floors and paint that peeled in the corners. But it was mine, all mine. I moved in on a Saturday morning with nothing but a suitcase, a box of books, and a strange sense of freedom I hadn't felt in years. The windows let in soft morning light, and for the first time in forever, I could drink coffee in silence without bracing for criticism. No Margaret, no sideways comments, no need to earn my place in my own home. The first few nights were quiet, almost too quiet. I kept waiting for someone to call, to show up, to apologize. But neither Margaret nor Daniel reached out. And strangely, that silence felt louder than any fight we'd ever had. By the end of the week, I had reconnected with my old professor from college. I told her I was looking to get back into architecture. Her response made me cry. "We always knew you had something rare," she said. "Come by the office next week. I'll introduce you to someone." It had been so long since anyone believed in me without needing me to earn it. One morning, as I was organizing the small guest room into a makeshift studio, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find Mrs. Hernandez, my former neighbor from across the street. She held a basket of muffins and a small bouquet of wildflowers. "I heard what happened," she said gently. "Just wanted you to know not everyone in that house forgot who you are." She came in and sat with me over coffee. For an hour, we talked about everything, from Daniel's blind spots to the day she overheard Margaret call me the help at a block party. She acted like she owned everything, but she didn't even own her own grace, Mrs. Hernandez said, shaking her head. "I always admired your patience, but I admire your courage more." That afternoon, I drove past my old house. Just once. Not to spy, but to say goodbye properly. The curtains were drawn, the garden neglected. Daniel was outside watering the lawn in a wrinkled t-shirt, looking tired and misplaced. I didn't stop. I didn't wave. I just kept driving, the wheel steady in my hands. Later that night, I got an email. It was from the firm in Manhattan. "We'd love to have you. The team is excited to meet you. Let's talk Monday." I stared at the screen for a long time. I remembered how small I had felt in that house, how Margaret's words once made me question my own worth, and now here I was, being welcomed back into a world I had once put on hold for someone else's comfort. I poured a glass of wine, stepped onto the tiny porch of my new place, and watched the stars blink into existence. Margaret had once told me I was just the maid, but now I was the architect of my own future, and nothing she said would ever take that from me again. 6 months passed. The firm in Manhattan didn't just hire me, they gave me the lead on a project designing transitional housing for single mothers. I rented a small apartment close to the office, traded my suburban silence for the hum of the city, and found something I hadn't known I was missing: purpose. In the mornings, I walked to work with a coffee in hand and confidence in my stride. At night, I came home to quiet that felt peaceful, not punishing. No more eggshells, no more pretending. And yet, despite the new life unfolding around me, one piece of unfinished business lingered: the house. I hadn't heard from Daniel since I left. Not a word. But the property taxes had come due last week, and the envelope was still in my name. I could have sold the house, of course, but something in me needed to go back. Not to reclaim it, but to release it once and for all. When I arrived, the place looked worn. The paint was fading, and the garden had gone to weeds. The house that once held all my effort now stood hollow. Daniel answered the door. His face sagged with a tiredness deeper than lack of sleep. He was polite, almost shy. "Didn't think I'd see you again," he said. "I just came to talk." He stepped aside. Inside, things were quieter, less tense, less sharp, but emptier too. Margaret wasn't there. I didn't ask why. We sat across from each other at the same table where I once folded napkins into hearts. "I didn't know," he said, voice low, "how much I'd lost until it was gone." I nodded. "You didn't want to know. That's different." He flinched but didn't argue. "I've thought about selling the house," I continued, "but I changed my mind." He looked up, surprised. "I'm transferring it," I said, "to a foundation. They'll turn it into a shelter for women leaving abusive homes. I already started the paperwork." Daniel's jaw tightened. "You're giving it away?" "I built it with love. If I can't live in it with dignity, I want it to shelter someone who truly needs it." He said nothing, maybe because he knew any protest would only prove my point. I left the papers on the table and stood to leave. Just before I reached the door, he spoke. "She's in assisted living now. Margaret. Early dementia." I paused but didn't turn around. "I don't hate her," I said, "but I won't let her words define the rest of my life." And then I walked out. This time, not out of anger, but peace. A month later, I returned to the house one last time just to see it transformed. Volunteers painted the walls. A new sign hung by the front door. The Rose House. A safe haven. A beginning. I smiled as I watched a young woman step inside with a child on her hip. She glanced at the sign, then at the door, then back at her child, and smiled too. Margaret once told me I was just the maid. Turns out I was the owner, and now, the giver. Some inherit power. Others build it from the ground up. I chose to build.